Chad. It's good to see your face again.
You too.
Okay, let me introduce. If you're here, you found some interesting conversation, and the reason I have Chad on is because he has a lot of credentials. I'm going to list his number one credential for me up front, which is if you followed my Instagram or my work. His book, Ask Powerful Questions, that he co-authored with Will Wise. Do you have it? Hey, there it is. Ask Powerful Questions. I tell people to read it, and I think they're going to be like, wait a minute, did Cole consult on this book? And it's the opposite. It's the book like just springboarded me into a lot of my work. When my emotional intelligence was at its lowest, and I was pointed in the direction of, Cole, you have to work on this. I read a lot of stuff that had a lot of highfalutin like concepts, and it was clever. And then I got to Ask Powerful Questions, and I was like, oh my God, there's a picture of a person and then an exercise where I have to think about things I would ask them. This is what I needed. And so it's very practical. But aside from that, Chad, you're the co-founder and CEO, but it's Chief Experience Officer according to the website. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Chief Experience Officer at We and Me. They help make connection easy for organizations and teams. He's been a TEDx speaker. He's worked with companies like JetBlue, Starbucks, Johnson & Johnson, Penn State, Notre Dame. You can go through, you can see all the logos on his website. You just keep scrolling. And I'm sure they're not all on there. You had to limit the logos.
Put them out there to make my mom proud.
Yeah. Your mom is very proud of all the logos on your website. You've got the connection cards that teams use. The name tags that are new, right?
I got one somewhere. Where is it? Yeah, it's like, name tags? I'm just not convinced that your name, Cole or Chad, is like the best possible point of entry to a meaningful conversation. And so that, name tags are just like put connection before content.
That's beautiful. I keep saying I'm going to buy those and use them for our next get together, and I haven't done it yet. I would also say that the hand to screen is your move. That's your video move, isn't it? I feel like you coined it. My buddy works in trademarks for the government, and I think you need to submit a trademark. Like, boom, that's the Chad Littlefield.
Do you know why? I have not used a single PowerPoint presentation in the last 10 years, and I don't intend to use them in the next 10. And so for me, it's like, if we're virtual, if we're remote, this is my way of saying, like, hey, like, come here. Like, we're like here, right? We're just like, I want to pull you into. Okay, anyway, this intro is great. This interview is going to be amazing.
Yeah. We're going to rabbit trail. We're going to see where it goes. Cool. One of your phrases that I like was people are full of what is it? A wealth of ungoogleable experience.
So everybody's carrying a lifetime of ungoogleable experience sitting on the 8-pound block on the top of their head.
Yeah. I had not heard the second half of that. Yeah, I say that to people, and it always kind of turns their brain on. They're like, oh yeah. Because you can Google everything, but I can't Google your story. So to that, we've heard your credentials. I would love to hear, or allow people to hear some of your story. Your work centers around connection, and you've thought a lot about it. You've invested a lot in it. You've given a lot of time and energy to it. How did that become like so important to you? Because I think people are wrestling with. I think they want to make moves in that direction to get better at connecting with people. And I think everybody knows like what you eat's important to you, like exercise or like mental health. But connection, you've decided connection is very important to the world. How did it become so important to you?
So, two pathways. One was like super emotional and relatively unrational, and one was very scientific. So the emotional pathway, I saw the movie Patch Adams with Robin Williams. It's like, at this point, it's like you could find it on a scroll somewhere. It was made in like 1995 or something. But in the movie, Robin Williams becomes a doctor to promote the quality of life. And he just has this amazing ability of empathizing and really seeing patients and interacting with them. So there's one scene in the movie where he walks into a terminally ill patient's room. The best, smartest clinicians and doctors could not get this guy to eat. A nurse would walk into the room. He'd throw a bedpan at him. This guy was just like, get out of here. Like, hardest walls to connect to. And Patch walked into the room, stared him dead in the eye, and he looks at this terminally ill patient and goes, kick the bucket. Push the daisies. And he just starts rattling off idioms about death. And then eventually, after like the fifth one, the guy softens and then throws one back. And it's like you would never find that strategy to build a relationship of trust with a patient. You would never find that in a medical textbook. But what the strategy was, in my opinion, the deepest possible level of empathy. It was the ability to make a connection with a stranger in like the hardest stranger in that moment in about 12 seconds. And so I saw that movie and I was like, the whole movie is lovely. And so I had my whole life plan figured out. I was going to be a doctor, throw on a clown nose, promote the quality of life over quantity, using humor and connection. It was like, then I took a chemistry class in college and that all fell through. No way I'm going to school for 10 years to hold a scalpel. And so here comes the science entry point into connection and conversation, which is, actually, wait, I still want to be Patch Adams. I just don't want to go to school for 10 years to hold a scalpel. Is this true? Can you actually heal people through connection? Can you actually even make a connection in 12 seconds? And so I went down this like super nerd rabbit hole into psychology and interpersonal psychology. And spoiler alert, yes. What I learned is like, connection has a really profound influence on the quality of our life and also the content of our life. Like what happens, what we choose to do, what you're going to do next year is actually quite dependent on the connections you make this year. And I think that my passion has kind of shifted to building relationship of trust to now realizing that, and we didn't write about this in Ask Powerful Questions all that much because it was focused on building a relationship of trust with that ungoogleable lifetime of experience. But I've now realized that questions are also an edit button that changes what happens next. Literally in the moment, right? I'm going to stop talking in a minute, Cole, and you're going to maybe toss out some question or response, and it will literally change the words that exit my mouth. And that's super interesting to me. And then on a grander scale, if I ask somebody a bigger question like, what's something you'd like to do more of? When I answered that question 2 years ago, just like small talk, chit chat with somebody, what's something I'd like to do more of? Scuba diving. I haven't gone in 4 years. I've got little kids, blah, 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 blah. 8 months after a mentor asked me that question, I was underwater scuba diving. And I came up from being underwater like, holy smokes, I would not actually be here if that person didn't just toss me that question very nonchalantly with no idea of how it would actually influence my material reality moving forward. So,
questions.
dang, I don't even know.
Questions
There's my story
are
and what I'm passionate about now.
Questions are an edit button for what happens next,
both immediately and in the long term.
Wow. Yeah, I mean that's a pretty like almost existential way to think about questions. It reminds me of my my wife liked those books when she was a kid where you would get to like a certain page and it would be like, if you want Susie to walk through the door, go to page 27. If you don't,
choose your own adventure.
I think Bear Grylls did a version of that on Netflix where you could like decide whether he'd wrestled the alligator or not, and you could click it. I don't know if you saw that. My kids loved it. It didn't last for long. I don't know if the technology, but that what I really like about that thing is it brings the. I think a lot of people feel powerless. To conversations feel like they have just sort of strapped themselves into a river boat, and they're going down the rapids, and whatever happens, and they're kind of stuck. And that questions are the ability to kind of like get some oars. Like, I mean, it's still not completely in your control, but the ability to navigate it, it can create a more beautiful future and a future that is more aligned with maybe, I don't know, I guess however you think about it, what you were made for, what you feel called to next.
So can I add some of the metaphor of going down the river and like the question is the paddle?
Yeah.
Let's move into a kayak where you have two paddles,
Yeah.
right? I think one paddle is questions, and that is absolutely an edit button. And then I've also become really clear that the way that we listen actually has the power to change what people say.
Say more.
Yesterday, for example, I led 2 workshops. They were identical workshops. I had the identical outline, which for me, outline is like a little bit of a loose flow. One group, super disengaged, not interested in being there, and totally preoccupied with their own stress and chaos that was going on in their life. The other group, totally leaned in, pumped to be there, super excited. And guess which workshop was better? Not because totally of that, but the things that actually I said, the way that I led was way better in round 2 because the way that they listened changed what I said. I could see that they were wanting more. And so this is conversationally, right? You're like, I can see your brain is on fire right now. You have a million neurons. Like you're listening to what I'm throwing out and it's editing the words that are coming out of my mouth. And that's really powerful because if I see you're in a rush or I see you're like totally preoccupied with yourself and you're like adjusting, you're like, you're more focused on you than the other person, I'm going to take what I say and shorten it.
Yeah, so I can actually draw out more from people based on how I listen. And when you say listen, you're not talking about, you're talking about an invisible thing, but there were physical signs. Like you could tell they were paying attention because they were leaned forward, their eyes are open, they look engaged.
And more than that is what people call active listening. And that's like level 1, like sure, don't be looking at your cell phone while someone's talking. Level like 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Fine. Level 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is actually in much more the choice and the mindset of presence. So I don't know. I stumbled across David Brooks's book, How to Know a Person, recently, and lovely book. The one concept that I'd pick out that I think is just like the absolute golden gem to have in mind entering a conversation is this concept that he talks about of an illuminating gaze. So what if I looked at you and I wasn't just like, oh, you have a lifetime of ungoogleable experience, but what if I looked at you and I was like, oh my gosh, like I've got all these like challenges, problems, and you probably have some like perspective that might actually help with that. And to look at you as like the smartest, most incredible individual that has something to offer the world, not just me, it's a very selfish perspective, but has something to offer. And that illuminating gaze where you're actually lighting somebody up as opposed to what I typically do is scan, judgment, filter everything they say through whatever judgment I've thrown out at them.
It's so easy to do. It's so I think people will push back sometimes when they get here, where they hear all this intentionality around connection and conversation. And there's a buzzword, authenticity. If I'm this intentional about connecting with people and I'm putting forth, I'm paying attention to how I listen. Okay, I'm asking a better question. Okay, I'm active listening. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. Don't I sort of create an inauthenticity? How is all this not just creating a facade that's inauthentic and actually creating less connection?
So this is anybody who's in a relationship or ever come across the book, The 5 Love Languages. My wife and I had this big aha about these 5 love languages. And it was, so one of her languages is acts of service. She receives love through acts of service. So me emptying the dishwasher, taking out the trash, tidying up is like just sending love. And there was some day we were particularly busy, stressed, tired, whatever, and I did all of those things. So I did all of the behaviors of them. And it didn't work. I was like, what the heck? You're not feeling love. You're like, what's going on? And then I realized, and we both realized, that we had been participating in the love languages, but we forgot the love part. We were doing the behaviors. And so this is why I don't love the concept of, or just the surface level language of active listening, because the behaviors without the true care and interests and curiosity in a person is just about useless.
Yeah.
Not totally useless, but just about useless.
Does that get at that intention piece that you talk about? Like the intention is the base of all the, when you talk about and ask powerful questions, intention's at the bottom. Yeah, we in the course, we put intention at the base. Like, I'm going to teach you how to have a conversation.
Cool.
If you don't get intention right.
100%. This is when Will and I wrote Ask Powerful Questions, the intention chapter was like a few paragraphs, and then one of the editors was like, you're teaching all this really phenomenal, super practical stuff on how to ask powerful questions, but none of it matters if your intention is just to get somebody to do something or manipulation or you-centered rather than. And so, the structure of the book that you're referring to is this pyramid where intention is on the bottom. So take this, for example. I sit down at a bus stop, and it just out of pure illustration's sake, for pure illustration's sake, if I sat down at a bus stop and you gave me the challenge of building a relationship of trust with a stranger at that bus stop, and my tool was a question, a good question: what brings you joy? So imagine me rolling up to a bus stop in Pittsburgh where I live. It's like, hey, what brings you joy? Person's like, most likely, like switching seats, getting on a different bus, moving around, etc. Now, add intention into that same scenario. I come to the bus stop and I say, hey, I know this is kind of odd, but I've recognized we've come to this bus stop and sat on the same bench 5 times in a row and taken the same route. And so this is a little bit odd, but I'm doing an experiment right now where I'm trying to ask questions that I typically don't. I'm curious, what brings you joy? It's like a sentence or two. I cannot guarantee that I'll build a relationship of trust or that will go well, but I can at least probably double the chances that a connection is made with that intention piece, right?
Let's talk about, because I think as people were listening, they probably felt an emotion as you shared that example of, oh God, they're gonna reject me. It's gonna be awkward, which is like, like a cuss word. What you use the phrase positive risk in some of your work. Is it worth it, and why risk rejection? Because I think people get stuck right there, right? They're right there on the edge of, I'm going to talk to that person. No, and I pull back into safety. And look, I'm pretty good at this stuff, and I watch your workshops, and you'll go out on an abstraction limb, and I'm like, oh God, are people going to answer this? Or are they going to be like, what are you talking about? It's a picture of an orange. That's not, I don't know how that describes my week. I look at your toolkit and I'm like, I cannot, the amount of experiments that you did to make those, I know that you had some people like, what is this, dude? Yeah. What is is the risk worth it? And can you just flesh out the idea of talk to people that are feeling the fear of the risk? And maybe what would you say to those people? Because I think there's a lot of them that are wrestling through that. They're going to get the content and they're going to need the courage.
The first thing I would say to them is, I believe you. I believe that you're scared of rejection. I believe that you're worried about what's going to happen. I don't believe that the consequences for that rejection are as great as they are in your head right now. So, let's see what happens. So Will and I met teaching a dialogue facilitation course. And so we would send, in a college context, so we would send 30 students in this class. We'd set a 30-minute timer and say, you have 30 minutes, go build a relationship of trust with 3 strangers. I can't teach you this from a PowerPoint. Go outside and do it. Go downtown, walk around campus, find 3 strangers, build a relationship of trust. And we're going to come back and debrief, what'd you do, how'd it go, what was the impact? And so you can imagine a bunch of college students, that emotion is extra elevated. So what happened is 30 somewhat peeved students left the classroom, and then what came back was 30 hyper-energized students. And there was this one student who was pretty quiet up into the class until that point, and he actually quieted everybody down. And he was like, whoa. I got to tell you, I was ticked when you rolled out this exercise. I did not sign up in this class to leave the class to go build a relationship of trust with 3 strangers. But I figured if I had to, I might as well go downtown and get an errand done. So I picked out a couple things that I needed and rewind. I did this exercise myself. So I had the same thinking as the student. So I went downtown to pick out a couple things that I needed, because I was like, if I'm going to assign students to this, I need to stay in integrity. And so I walked down, picked out a few things, and the cashier had bright colored tattoos all over her neck. I was like, teach this stuff for a living. I got this. Hey, I'm so curious, what's the story behind your tattoos? And she goes, I liked the colors. I did not build a relationship of trust.
Back up.
Absolutely not. So student comes back, telling the story now, and he's like, okay, I get to the front, and this cashier had bright colored tattoos. He went to the same store. Bright colored tattoos all over her neck. And I just got to the front, and I said, I just have to ask, how annoying is it when people ask you about your tattoos? And she goes, you have no idea. And so, in fact, sometimes in the middle of August, I want to be wearing a turtleneck. In fact, there's just this guy in here asking me, what's the story behind your tattoos?
That's fantastic.
And so I think for me, that is the power of intention. He went in, and his intention was created and made from within her shoes, not within his own. He was not trying to build a relationship of trust. He turned around and said, what must it be like to be you? Oh, you have really cool tattoos, but they're really bright, really obvious. I bet a lot of people make comments about that and ask them. Okay, I'm just going to ask you, how annoying is it to... And his question was sourced from what it must be like to be her. And that is the difference between, like, things not going well for me and things potentially going really well.
Yeah, it's sourced from empathy as opposed to, like self-promotion or self... to going back to so you say, like, hey, I know it's scary. That emotion is real. We're not going to diminish that. But maybe we can second guess the severity of what you're forecasting. There was, and I don't have it, and perhaps wherever we end up posting this, I can post the notes. They did a study where they asked a bunch of people to do the same thing. Have you seen this? And they basically asked them to estimate how difficult or uncomfortable it would be to talk to another person, like on the bus, on the subway. And they estimate, and the people were like 8 out of 10 uncomfortable, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 uncomfortable. And then after they did it, they said, how uncomfortable was it? And it was like 2 out of 10 most of the time. And they said that, like, consistently and predictably, our estimation of the difficulty of talking to another person is drastically higher and wrong. So learning to, like, second guess those things of, like, it's real, it feels real, second guess it, it's definitely worth it. We're pushing up on time, so I'm going to pick. You doing okay? Okay.
I'm good.
All right.
I'm having fun.
Okay. I think a lot of people have this. I think you would speak to this well. I think I saw when you moved to, I don't know if it was where you're at now or a different city, you talked about this specific issue, and I get this question all the time. People get they watch my Instagram, they try out some little tools, and they're magic. I mean, they really are magic. Even if your intention is off, you switch your why question to a how question, all of a sudden the world starts changing around you. It's like wizardry. And so they do it, but then what they find is people start becoming very talkative with them, but they don't reciprocate those questions, and they can end up in a different version of loneliness. So I was lonely because I never talked to people. Now I'm everybody's therapist because the feeling of being seen is missing in a lot of people's life. They just have, they're like, I don't think I've ever felt heard before. So you do that for other people, and all of a sudden everybody's talking to you, and you're like, nobody ever asks about me. How have you wrestled through that? Because you're very good at question asking on a personal level, and then, like, how do you navigate that?
I heard a friend of mine once say, a conversation without self-disclosure is an interrogation.
Yeah.
And so this is the dynamic that you're pointing to. And an interrogation, quite lonely because you are not actually connected with the person you're interrogating. And so the story you're referring to is when I moved to Asheville, North Carolina. I lived there for 5 years. And my way of settling into the town and getting to know Asheville, because I had no tie whatsoever, was showing up to an entrepreneur meetup or coffee meetup or random networking thing and having one-on-one coffees with people over the course of like 2 years. And I just kept, out of more like reflection, I kept people's business card or whatever little thing they gave me as we went along. And so when I left Asheville, I found this box that had right around 300 to 400 different cards, meaning 300 to 400 individuals that I had a conversation with. And about halfway through that pile, I realized this dynamic that you're pointing out, which is I was asking lots of questions, but they left the conversation feeling like it was a great chat because they just got to unpack all this stuff.
They loved you.
But they have no clue who I am in the world. And so this is what I did. I would stop 10 to 20 minutes into the conversation and just say, like, I'm so enjoying this chat. And I realize I've just been, like, tossing questions out to you. I'm curious, like, what are you curious about? So the curiosity about curiosity, right? I'm curious, what questions do you have? Toss over here. And there, you could see their brain break. So this is what I would call a positive social risk. People don't usually do this in conversation.
No.
But 200 conversations in, I was like, I'm not going to do this 200 more times where we just do this one-sided thing. And so I just started doing that, and it was awesome. It created the shift, leveled the playing fields, and the awkward part was about the 5-second period where after I asked that, I literally watched their brain break and go from like they were telling me about things they already knew because I was asking about them to prefrontal cortex right in the head, like the part of your brain that's really turning on. And they thought, and they would usually look up to the left or the right, and then they'd toss a question out to me. And so what I did was ask them to ask me a question. I just did it in the form of a question. I just said, "What questions?"
Did you get anybody that was like, I don't know? Did you get any people that just didn't have the skill set to ask a question back?
No, not my recollection. Because every kid, one of the things my little favorite cocktail party fun fact is, kids ages 3 to 5 ask 300 to 400 questions per day. Adults, on average, ask 6 to 12 questions per day. And I don't know about your life, but half of those questions for me are like, what should we eat tonight?
Yeah.
Where are you?
Utility.
You need this at the store. Utility, not connection. Yep.
Yeah. So they tended to ask it back. And it took, I would imagine, some courage to flip that script. I would imagine, I tried that. I remember you talking about it, and I was like, I'm going to try it. Because I tend to ask good questions, and people just talk about themselves. I'm like, oh my goodness, I've been talking all this time, ask you all these questions. This isn't an interrogation. I bet you're curious. What are you curious about me? I mean, that's a very vulnerable suggestion. But to the point about authenticity, without some measure of risk or vulnerability, you are being inauthentic. You're just kind of guarding yourself. Okay, let's shift to work, and then we'll be done. Work. A lot of what you do is with companies inside of the workplace, talking about connection. And some people that will follow my stuff, it's because they're trying to get better at this stuff in work. I'm curious, is there a difference with connection with that guy on the bus stop or your Thanksgiving table with your family versus in a work setting? Because
Yes.
Yeah, there is, but like, what are the rules? Because the rules seem so nebulous and unclear, but when you break them, I have a saying that their work is full of implicit rules with explicit consequences, and that's like a cruelty in the world. So how do you suggest that people navigate connection in the workplace? So they learn these conversation skills, they have a natural curiosity, but now they're going to have to filter that curiosity based on work. How do you advise differentiating there?
I think I probably need to meditate on this for longer, but I think the biggest difference is anonymity. And anonymity relates to psychological safety. It's how safe do I feel right now in this interaction? And context changes that, right? So if I ask what brings you joy in a dark alley to a 6'8" man wearing a trench coat, I don't know. I probably feel a little different than if I'm asking a colleague that I've worked with and known for 5 years. And so the context of work is, for the most part, you're going to see this person again. The bus stop person, the risk in some way, I think, is actually, even though the perceived risk might be higher, I think the actual risk is lower at the bus stop person because worst case scenario, they say, ugh, get away from me.
Yeah.
And you never see them again. At work, the worst case scenario is that you see them the next day and they have cast some judgment about who you are based on, and here's where it gets important, based on a genuine curiosity and intent to connect. So they're going to be judging you based off of a number of really positive things, most likely.
Yeah.
Now, there is a way to overdo it, right? I think my opening question, there's a scaffold to connection. My opening question to a colleague, or if I just wake up one Monday and I'm like, I'm sick of having small talk with my colleagues. Like, I want to get more meaningful conversations going. And I go in and I'm just like, hey, I'm sick of this small talk stuff. Like, can you just tell me things that you've never told anybody before? And like, just unpack your last therapy session with me right now in this boardroom. That's not going to go well because the scaffold, it's like way too much. Somebody defined trauma for me as too much, too fast, too soon. So with connection, you don't want to traumatize somebody else by going too much, too fast, too soon with your conversation. And so being curious, but put yourselves in the store clerks with tattoos over the next shoe, right? Step into their shoe to say, what must life be like for you? Okay, it's Monday. You may or may not want to be at work right now. You're probably not thinking about the importance of generating deeper conversation with colleagues, because that's my thing right now. That's what I am caring about. You're just like want to get your stuff done. And so I might ask you a question like, hey, I know I usually ask you how your weekend was. I'm curious right now, like what's taking up lots of your brain space right now?
Yeah.
Way different scaffold level. And then I'll say one other thing that feels like maybe my favorite feature of questions, and I think the most important feature of questions. And that is, you can ask any question to anyone, and for the most part, they have 100% choice and autonomy in how they answer that question. And when you are trying to be a better conversationalist, this is a very important thing to remember, to give people their power back. Don't think that your question is going to make them do something specific. Because if you ask me, Cole, what brings you joy? Actually, let's just play this.
Okay.
Cole, can you give me a level 1 answer to this question? What brings you joy?
Taking a walk with my dog.
Level 1. Cool. Level 4 answer. What is bringing you joy?
When my kids are honest with me about their struggles and they like trust me with stuff.
Yeah. Both are true, and you had full autonomy to pick which one, and they created a different level of connection.
Yeah.
So I learned things in both. I connected you with in both. And so I think sometimes we forget, like, people choose how they're going to answer the question, and they can choose to say no. So unless you're the CEO and you're intimidating to somebody because you've set up a culture of intimidation, or just the hierarchy is intimidating, then you need to do a little bit more intention sharing to be like, hey, I'm not trying to, I wouldn't say this necessarily, but the person's going to be wondering, like, are you fact-finding so that you can fire me? Or are you, like, poaching me for a different position, right? So intention, getting clear about intent.
When we taught, we're working on a curriculum for middle school students right now on how to connect. And the thing we put together that was like an adaptation was share and then ask, because people are always wondering why you're asking. So if I can share a little bit like why I'm asking, then you know. And I would, to some of my neurodivergent students, there isn't like your scaffolding of there are level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 isn't immediately obvious, because sorting through a hierarchy of importance is actually really difficult for some brains. And so that's actually very helpful for some people to be like, you do have a choice when somebody asks you a question. And this is a little bit how my brain works. If you ask me, how are you today? I immediately go to a level 4 answer. I forget that I can give you a level 1 answer, and that's going to be okay right now, and that's not BS. That's just appropriate for the context. I'm just seeing you on the sidewalk. I don't need to know that you're stressed about bankruptcy or that your marriage is in shambles. But everything in my brain wants
100%.
to share that. Like, I don't want to tell you, like, I'm doing good, just what's bringing me joy. Yeah, I mean, sunshine yesterday was really nice. Like, I feel like I'm BSing you. But I think it's worth saying that for probably the majority of the population, if it's a level 1 context, a level 1 answer isn't shallow, it's appropriate. And
to be clear, the important feature is you want to choose. So let's just think of every question as a multiple choice question. There's not very many conversational, like relationship of trust sort of questions that have only one answer.
Yeah.
Even closed questions, right? Did you grow up in Boston? Well, I lived the first 6 years of my life in Ohio, and then I moved to Massachusetts, and we lived a little bit south. Like, there's very, very few questions that have only one answer. And so just for the neurodivergent or not brain, just imagine that each question, and your brain's really quick, and a lot of neurodivergent brains are really quick.
Very quick.
Right? And so just imagine somebody asks you a question, just think of, maybe 4 is too much, just think of like, just get 2 answers real quick. Hey, how you doing right now?
I like that.
Okay, how am I doing literally right now? I'm actually okay. It's good to be getting fresh air. Yeah, and also I'm worried about bankruptcy. We're on a walk. I'm just seeing a neighbor. And okay, I'm going to pick option 1. Your brain can do all of that in like 0.8 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really great. I think that frees up a lot of people. You'll see on the internet a lot of people or students that I talk to like, I just want to skip the small talk. I want to go to the, existential deep things, and realizing that context changes content. And so I really want to coin the phrase contexticity, but I think it just doesn't come off the tongue very well.
It's a little tricky. It's
just
interesting. A little tricky though.
There's a little context.
So I know that we could talk for 2 hours. So maybe one more thing, and then we'll land the plane. This feels important. Depth has nothing to do with the content of the conversation, in my humble opinion. It does not have to do with whether you're talking about secrets or philosophy or the afterlife, or if you're talking about sunshine and teddy bears. Depth does not have to do, in my opinion, with the content of a conversation. It has to do with the process of the conversation.
That's a really interesting.
So the process, and so when I think about people wanting to skip small talk, here's what I would invite you into. Go deep with the process. So be extra present, extra curious, extra caring about who that person is, extra empathetic, even if they're talking about sunshine and rainbows. Because the process is, and when people walk away with, they don't think, for sure, they do think to some level of like, dang, like we were just walking our dogs and all of a sudden we're talking about the afterlife. That is a level of intensity, but not necessarily. If the process was, I bumped into my neighbor and he's like, man, it's cold outside. And I'm like, yeah, wouldn't it be sweet if the afterlife was just warm? We're talking about that, but the process is totally different, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you're trying to, and I believe that I exist on the planet to gently eradicate small talk and create conversation that matters. And so for me, I think about how can I deepen the process and not the content. And the big learning for me was with my 4-year-old. I kept trying to have deep conversations with my 4-year-old. He doesn't give a hoot. You know what's deep to him? When dad gets on his level and just plays with him. Play is right now his language of conversation. And so the content is play, but the process is I'm super present, and what I'm communicating to him is he's the only person that matters right now. I'm not concerned about anything else going on in life or on my phone or anywhere else. I'm just with you. And all of that subtext is communicated through process, not through content.
Yeah. Is process and presence synonymous in this context? Because a lot of what you're saying when you say process, I see if you're present to the conversation, it can be qualified as deep. Is there something that other than presence that fits into that process?
I think so. I probably just focus more on presence there. Content is what is being said in the conversation, so literally words. Process, in the way that I think about it, is literally everything else other than the words.
Yeah.
So if I want to deepen a conversation, I might turn toward that person and show them that I'm actually focused, as opposed to when I'm walking a dog, I usually have one foot aiming the direction I want to go.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I want to keep going that way. I don't want to square off and have this this chat. And so that said, I think the nuance that you bump up against of like, if you want to just skip past small talk, I think you can run into some of the same traps if you just try to deepen process. Because if you're walking the dog and you square off with somebody and you get hyper present, even though you're talking about something flighty, that's also too much. So there is an art to
the content's still shallow, but you don't match it. I think there's a lot of people will live their life with people that are like, they want to have a conversation about, it's not sunshine and rainbows, it's cutting their dog's nails. Well, I cut it and I bought this powder that was supposed to stop it from bleeding, and then we just got that carpet, and Susan the other day said that if you get anything on that carpet, you're going to be in trouble. And you could feel our minds wandering as I do this. But that is, a very genuine disclosure for that person. And so I've always struggled with how do I show up to be present to that. So I think it's helpful for me to remember the content doesn't define depth, like presence and process have more to do with depth. Because that person could walk away and be like, man, that was really nice connecting with them today. Even though they talked about that. Because I was present to it. And I listened and I asked questions. Because they chose. They said, that's what I want to talk to you about.
This is one of the tools, the practical tools we teach in the book, is to find something that somebody's wearing, carrying, sharing, or presenting, and ask a question rooted in your natural curiosity. The reason we chose that as one of the main tools to build a quick relationship of trust is it's something safe that's in the context. When people kind of get stuck trying to create conversations that matter, is they try to pull things that aren't in the room. They're not there right now. And so if you ask me, like, hey, what's the story about this ring? It's a safe way to access one of the most important relationships in my life.
Yep.
Because I'm here, right? And so what happens is a simple question about a shirt that somebody's wearing, or what's on the back of your hat, Cole. A simple question like that is a window. Let's see it.
Oh, no. No, it's a Buc-ee's hat. This is not sponsored by Buc-ee's. I've never been to a Buc-ee's, but my friend bought me the hat, and I could be bought by anybody if they just buy me clothes, because I hate buying clothes.
So watch this, right? Some of your folks would be saying, well, we're just having a surface level conversation about Buc-ee's right now. Watch this, the magic of a second question. You mentioned, like, friend got you that hat. I'm curious, how'd you meet that friend?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, there's a whole rabbit hole there. Mike was, right. We wouldn't even have time.
Just remembering that oftentimes that surface level small talk with just the magic of a second question can safely go to a conversation that matters to you or to them, or hopefully both.
And we cover that stuff in the conversation course, because what I find is a lot of people they're in those dual monologues where they're just sharing stories with the intent to connect. They really are trying to connect through stories, but you never quite get past that surface because you're just ping-ponging stories. Yep. Well, dude, we could do this for a couple hours, probably.
Yeah.
This has been delightful. Guys, if you're watching this, go check out Chad's stuff. If you run a company, if you need somebody to come in and work with your teams, there really is nobody better. You can go to his website, see all the logos, see all the testimonies. They're genuine. And above all credentials, Chad has been a really kind friend to me. And I think he's doing a lot of good in the world. So, Chad, thanks for being here. Thanks for carving out the time. And I hope the rest of your day is full of lovely connections with your family and whoever you got next.
And I'm going to close by holding up a mirror and sending all that affirmation right back to you.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.
Oh.